Welcome to the first annual Appalachian Trail Arts and Culture Festival, presented by the Appalachian Trail Museum and the Earl Shaffer Foundation. The festival is a chance to celebrate the Appalachian Trail community talents, creativity, and ties, and will bring together authors, historians, storytellers, journalists, musicians, designers, and videographers. The day's event was held at the Furnace Stack Pavilion at Pine Grove Furnace State Park. Pine Grove Furnace State Park is located at the northern tip of the Blue Ridge Mountains off of Pine Grove Road in Gardners, Pennsylvania. What better place to host an event than at the halfway mark of the Appalachian Trail? Also at this location is the Appalachian Trail Museum, which is the only museum in the country dedicated to hiking. The event consisted of several panels throughout the day. Midday, a lunch was prepared and available to everyone. Thanks to the Earl Shaffer Foundation for grilling out on this sunny summer day, you fed many hungry bellies. Lunchtime became an event all in itself, as we were serenaded with the talents of a local musician, with a background of folk music, good food, and a chance to meet and greet old friends and make new ones. Lunchtime was also a chance to sneak over to see the arts and crafts designer who created some handcrafted jewelry available for sale. Gotta love those AT blazes. After lunch, we heard from authors and historians as they shared their experience and knowledge of the trail. And the event was wrapped up listening to the dramatic storytelling by Appalachian Trail Hall of Fame recipient Warren Doyle. The following clips include the second set of panels from the event.
Okay, thanks everybody, and hope you had a good lunch and enjoyed the concert by Tom Jolin. Two presentations. We have first our history panel, and then I hope everybody can stay. We have our storyteller for our last presentation of the day, Warren Doyle, who has accumulated a few stories about the AT over the 52 years that he's been actively hiking the AT. And I've heard his stories many times over the years, and each time I hear him, I enjoy him more. He's a great storyteller. So now we'll have our history panel, some of the very best historians of the AT, starting with our moderator, Glenn Luce, the museum vice president, the person in charge of all of the great exhibits we have at the museum, and a historian in her own right, probably the leading historian of the women pioneers who've helped develop the Appalachian Trail. So thanks, Glenn.
Hello, everybody. This is an event that we would like to repeat each year. So as you go through your daily life over the next couple of months, if you run into people who you know have some affinity to the arts or the culture that comes around the Appalachian Trail and the Appalachian Mountains, mention the museum and the fact that we are starting this annual event for arts and culture. It can be photography, it can be paintings, it can be jewelry making, it could be textiles, and of course it can be those who use the spoken word and the written word, and that would be really great. My name is Gwen Luce. I have the privilege of working with Larry at the museum and doing a lot of the exhibits. So if you don't have time at the end of this, please come back and visit. Around July 17th, we will be bringing in new exhibits. I think on each of the floors there'll be something new to see. Primarily the one exhibit for children. So please come back after July 17th and you'll be able to see some new things in the exhibits in the museum. So Without any further ado, I want to introduce you to our three history panelists. I asked them to write a few words about themselves as a little bio. And we'll start here with Wells Loeb. And he writes about himself. He has a beautifully told 2024 memoir, He Was Too Young to Die. Many of us that were here this morning heard a little bit about that. It's a love letter to his friend that tells the story of a teen friendship through hiking and preserves the memory of Bob Brugman, 17, on a solo southbound hike from Katahdin. He fell into floodwaters at Clarendon Gorge in Vermont on July 4th, 1973, and did not survive. Together, they bonded as school pals and hiking companions in New Jersey from age 14, and they logged 18 miles together ahead of the accident. Loeb returned to the AT with the purpose in 2010, reached Clarendon Gorge in 2016, and last month in Georgia completed the AT 14 State Challenge. Congratulations. I know Wells because he leads some hikes, and he's a very good hike leader. He leads hikes for AMC Delaware Valley and Keystone Trails Association. And he lives in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Next to him is another friend that I'm very privileged to know, Miles Kelly. He's a lifelong AT hiker who first set foot on the trail in 1971 as a young Boy Scout. Good for him. We had a lot of Boy Scouts to come through the museum. That's great. He is the author of 2 books and a number of articles about the trail, including Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail, which he's here to talk about today. And now he has a new one coming out, A Hiker's History of the Appalachian Trail. Mills is a professor emeritus of history at George Mason University, a former Fulbright scholar, an archivist of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, and he's a member of the Appalachian Trail Museum Board. So, thank you for being here today. Brian King. I can't say enough about Brian, but I'll try and be brief. I met Brian when I was trying to write my first book, and he was a great joy to work with. You will find that Brian has amazing things to say about the history of the Appalachian Trail. I would consider him the historian, the preeminent historian on the Appalachian Trail. And you'll also find out today that Brian is a very modest man and he's very soft-spoken. So you're going to have to really listen up. He was the ATC publisher since 1987 until 2022. He was responsible in that capacity for all of ATC's publications, programs, and their archives. He's a preeminent AT historian, and we're very honored at the museum that he's a member of the AT Museum Hall of Fame. And he's a great contributor to telling those of us on the Hall of Fame committee. Many times he sets us straight, and he tells us exactly the correct history of many, many, many incidents and many parts of Appalachian Trail history. So I'm very happy to have all 3 of you. Before they even speak a word, let's give them an applause for being here. Okay, what I'd like to do is something a little bit different from what the other moderators did. I gave them a series of some questions and asked them, to come a little bit prepared to respond to those questions. But after that, we're going to have some time and we'll open it to all of you to try and challenge them a little bit more with some questions they haven't heard ahead of time. So the first one is very simple. Tell us the title of your book and how you chose it. So we'll just go down the line.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming out. And
Yeah, we're in good shape.
Good, I don't have to scream. Okay. I have some friends here and some family members, and I want to especially thank them for coming to this event this afternoon. So my book is titled He Was Too Young to Die, and importantly, there's a subtitle with it, the subtitle being A Love Letter to My Friend. And without telling you exactly what the book is about, the title comes from back in my high school days in Flemington, New Jersey. In my particular class, there were 3 members who did not make it to graduation due to some pretty terrible deaths. One was a homicide, one was a vehicular homicide, and the other one was the young man on the cover, his drowning in Clarendon Gorge in Vermont before his senior year. So they didn't particularly have a lot in common as classmates, and I put this in the book, at ages 15, 16, and 17, they were all too young to die, hence where the title comes from. The subtitle, A Love Letter to My Friend, actually came from my wife, Terry, who's here today, and she had to witness the months of labor and emotion that I poured into the development of the book. And it was very big sacrifice actually for both of us. But we never had, during the course of it, we never had any expectation that any sales that would follow would cover the cost of publication. So as such, Terry, I think, very accurately identified the story that I tell here as a posthumous love letter to Bob, and also a gift of charity to his brothers and his mother.
So the title, Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail, means 2 things really. The first is that when the trail moved away from its original route in Southern Virginia in 1952, it became lost to the AT community because it was written out of the trail guides. And so after that year, there was no way to know that 300 miles of the trail followed an entirely different route. But it's also about the Appalachian communities in southwestern Virginia who regularly experience loss as a result of the actions of others. So for 20 years, the Appalachian Trail came through their communities, and then all of a sudden it was snatched away. And this is kind of the story of Southern Appalachia. Outsiders do bring things and then take them away without explanation. And so it's both a book about the way that the trail was rerouted and why, and this original route that was so much different from the one that we follow today, but also what the experience of Appalachian communities in general is. And I'll tell you, if you go to Floyd County or you go to Carroll County and you talk to people who are of a certain age, they'll talk to you as though the Appalachian Trail left 5 years ago. It's still very much a part of their lives. And then the second book is, as Glenn mentioned, I have a new book coming out October 7th, A Hiker's History of the Appalachian Trail. And it is true, I chose that title very intentionally because it is a hiker's history, regardless of how many minutes or hours or days they might have spent on the trail. So it's from the perspective of people who were there for 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or an entire through hike.
My title for this Founder, which is half history, half pretty pictures, was People's Path. But then somewhere along the way, the sales team at Random House and Mazzoli got together and they said, no, hiking has to be in the title. This has to be in the title. We need this. So now the real title is the Appalachian Trail, Celebrating America's Hiking Trail. And that's it. It was the sales team's choice for how to do that. I like the People's Path, but some people think that's communist. Because if you're a people, you're a communist, right? Yeah. Where's Warren? There's Warren. So anyway, that's the way it is. And there'll be a second edition coming out in late this year, early next year, correcting a lot of errors.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very insightful, and I can recommend all of those books, 4 of them, since that we just spoke about. Definitely, all of them are very much worth reading. The next question I have: many of us that have tried to write something, even if it's just a paragraph, let alone a full book, there's someone who has to give you some sort of inspiration or be your support during that whole process. So my question is, who or what was the greatest source of support for you during the writing and getting this actually to publication?
I'd like to go first because I'm sitting next to the person who was the greatest support and inspiration to me as I was writing the book. None of what I've written about the Appalachian Trail in the last 9 years could I have written without the help and support of Brian King. So that was easy.
I want to point out that this fellow here has spent way more time in those archives than I have. And I'll do my answer because if you said greatest sort of support, that's kind of tough. If you said greatest source of nagging, that would be my editors and publishers at Rizzoli. Like, you had 3 weeks to finish, and there was 1 chapter done. So. Anyway, they were wonderful throughout the whole process, and they are. The publisher, he is a hiker, Boy Scout leader, and stuff like that. But the editor that I dealt with the most, she is not. She's out in Indiana, but she couldn't be more wonderful.
Okay, well, the person I was tempted to cite is known to this museum and the Appalachian Trail community, and that would be a southbound thru hiker in 1973 who was my deceased friend's last companion on the AT, and that is Richard Judy from Georgia. Some of you know who he is, and he's quoted quite a bit in my book. But I have to give the day-to-day credit again to my wife Terry, and she was with me the very moment atop a mountain in New Jersey when I had a moment of clarity and committed myself to writing Bob's story. And then Terry stayed with me every step of the way through 4 years of multiple rewrites and crafting an actual book and working with a publisher to finally bring it to an end last August. Terry has a great eye for detail and a lot of smarts with technology that I don't have, and was a big key to getting the project over a lot of bumps and hurdles to the finish line. And all along the way, she wouldn't let me quit as badly as I wanted to quit at times.
Was there something that you had to cut or edit or change from your book that perhaps you really didn't want to, but you went ahead and did it anyway? So if someone were to read your book, is there something in there that they wouldn't be able to read because you were asked to change or eliminate that? Is there something left out?
To answer that question, when I was developing the manuscript peaked at 65,000 words, and then it was ultimately cut down to 59,000. And there's a lot of background material in here about our years in growing up in New Jersey, and it is a memoir. So it's in some form, it's a bit of a life story. But as I found out along the way, and through the suggestions of some of my editors, there was if some of that material, if it didn't connect directly to Bob, my deceased friend, his family, or the Appalachian Trail, it ultimately either was condensed or omitted.
I didn't really have to cut much out of the current book, the Lost Appalachian Trail book, but the one that's coming out in October came in about 10,000 words over the limit that my publisher set. And if you've worked with a publisher, they can be very strict about that because it has a lot to do with how they budget things. And so my chapter on the history of hiking gear, backpacking gear, is a lot shorter than the original version. I had a lot more to say about, for instance, wood frame packs that were very common on the trail in the 1930s. How many of you have hiked with a wooden frame pack? One? Yeah, so the Trapper Nelson, those were really popular. But so I had to cut a lot of that kind of stuff out, which was hard for me because I loved the gear.
I don't really remember anything I had to cut or change. I mean, there was a certain amount of self-censorship in respect to my paycheck. But other than that, I mean, length is always an issue, but normal editing, normal questions, do you need to repeat this kind of stuff? But there wasn't anything serious or, going to the mat about.
All right, then if you look at your manuscript as it went to publication and as we would read it today, what would you say is the main message or the main messages from your book?
There's a couple. One is that when you're talking about the history of the trail and ATC, and they are combined, we're not talking about just one or two people. It wasn't just Mackay who was not sitting around dreaming about things, and it was not just Avery who was not sitting around working people off. He was a wonderful leader, actually. And it wasn't all volunteers. There was a marriage from the very beginning between the volunteer corps and government workers of all levels, and it would not have gotten on the ground without that. So that's really the main message, is there are a lot of people involved, not just one or two, and the government played a role. They were joined at the hip from the beginning. Now that's changed somewhat the last few years, but that's a different story.
I'd like to, if I could, just add one word, because Brian did talk about the photography. So I think there's a main message there that the Appalachian Mountains are absolutely gorgeous. And in and of themselves, they have a history. And the photography certainly, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, gorgeous is a good word, magic is another.
Magic, yeah. It's a beautiful book. I jokingly say to Brian, this is not a book that you want to carry with you on any hike. I think he said 5.5 pounds, but it's worth every ounce of what it costs to pick it up off the table. So definitely, thank you.
So for the book that's coming out in October, my primary source for that book was the shelter registers, because it's there that we learn about hikers who hike for a few hours or a few days. You know, they didn't write books about that 2-hour loop hike that they did, and if they wrote such a book, who would read it? So, but they did write 2 sentences, 5 sentences, sometimes drew a cartoon, whatever it might be, in those shelter registers, going back into the 1930s. And so I spent a good part of a year just reading those registers, and I will just put in a plug for the volunteers here at the museum. I did a lot of that reading of those registers while I was on a Fulbright fellowship in Germany, and I was able to do that because of the digitization efforts of the volunteers here at the museum. So, yes. I was able to carry about 500 shelter registers with me to Germany on one thumb drive. But it's really revelatory to read those registers, because you just kind of you sort of bathe in it and just let it emerge slowly but surely. And what emerged from reading all of that is that hikers, the vast majority of hikers on the Appalachian Trail, whether they're there for a couple of hours or all the way up to a thru hike, do so for pretty much the same reason, and that is that they want to touch the wild. You know, we live in a very not wild society, and this was part of Mackay's idea in the first place, was that we would go into the mountains and leave that technological society behind for however long we were there. But it's more than that. I originally wanted to call the book, I Saw a Bobcat. My publisher would have nothing to do with that title, but I can't tell you how many times I saw that in a shelter register. I mean, dozens and dozens of times people would write, I saw a bobcat, with 4 or 5 exclamation points. And that really, that's the moment where we get to set aside civilization for just a minute, is when you see a bobcat or a bear or a mother turkey with some chicks crossing the trail, or whatever it is. And I think that's my conclusion in the book, is that is why people go onto the trail, is for those kinds of moments.
Okay, so my book, of course, does have a tragic component to it, a terrible accident, a drowning of a young man who was a very capable young man, and so there's that sad. It's not an all grim book, but there's that sad component in there, the boy who died was the last person you'd expect to have an accident on the trail, but he made a mistake, and it costs them. So the message that I would like my readers to take is hike with your head and adjust the day's itinerary with changing conditions, whether it's environmental conditions, trail conditions, just how you feel out there on that day. A single miscalculation on the AT in the right circumstances can kill you.
Very, very interesting and very true. I think many of us have been in situations where maybe the weather isn't agreeing with us, but we still have this goal of what we want to accomplish in that particular day. And that translates to life too. I mean, sometimes you just have to back off and think of other factors besides that goal for that day or for that moment and make some smart decisions, definitely. This is the question that I kind of like that I came up with. Just imagine that I'm a book reviewer for the New York Times, an aspiration of mine. And if I were trying to write a book review about your book, what 3 words would you like me to use in that book review? Whoever wants to go first.
Gwen's questions were great, by the way. And I did spend a lot of time on them, and I thought about them, and I revised this so many times, and I revised my three words many times. Looking for that good word. I had to go to the thesaurus several times to come up with these. But what I came up with, and it helps if you know more about the story in here. Evocative, meaning there's a lot of interesting intersection of emotion in here. Tender-hearted. Okay, I had to tell, there's some very sensitive stuff in here, and I had to tell this as sensitively and from the heart as much as I could to keep, because I was really writing this for the family, for Bob's living family. And the other one that I just decided this one a couple of days ago was penetrating. There's just a lot in here. The chapters are short. The chapters are not hard to read, but I think there's a depth in the chapters and gets you to think beyond the words on the page.
And I'll admit I don't remember what I told you, but I've thought about it, and I think I've got 2 out of the 3. So rich, as in rich in detail, inspiring, and the one I think I did not say is funny. Because, for instance, how many of you on a 10-day backpack stuffed into your pack 5 pounds of bacon? That was very common. Very, very common. And you might wonder, how could you possibly carry all that bacon in your backpack, especially on a hot day like this, without having everything just be greasy, not to mention bears chasing you down the trail? And it's really simple. Abercrombie & Fitch, which was, until the 1970s, the world's premier outdoor outfitter, and then it became a mall store, but they sold something called a pork bag. And that's what you put your bacon in, was your pork bag.
I don't know, I guess my 3 words would be it provokes curiosity.
Okay, I'm going to add one more question before we get to the last one here. And I know that there's got to be people, I know there are, in the audience here who have thought about writing the book. We all have great stories, all right. What would be your advice, being that you're sitting here looking at a group where I'm sure there's a few people who would like to tell a particular story in a book? What would be your advice to them?
So, as the author of 4 and 2 more in production, I would say there is no correct way to write a book. And I'm really inspired, I have been for years, by the work of she's an American who teaches in New Zealand named Helen Sword. And she thought that she was a bad writer, she thought, because she wasn't a daily writer. She read all about, you have to spend 2 hours every single day. Maybe you can take Sunday off, but it's every single day. You have to be disciplined. And she realized, I'm not that human. I'm a burst writer. I sit down and write for 3, 4, 5 hours, and then I don't think about it for a week. And yet she's published 6 books. And so So there's no correct way to do it. And I would also say, I think the best book I've ever read on writing is Stephen King's On Writing. And you can pick it up in any used bookstore for about 50 cents now. And last time I checked, he was pretty successful. And he has a lot of really great advice about writing and about the process of writing. So start with Stephen King.
And he's also a really great guy and no relation. I guess my advice would, okay, everybody's got a story. Their mother thinks so. Everybody. But I would say take a trip to a strange city, sit down with a stranger, and tell your story. And if the person is still awake, then proceed from there. But you have to be factual. It's good if you want distribution. You need a mainline publisher, or an independent publisher, university presses, things like that. These days, everybody can self-publish. That costs money. And worst of all, these days, even the mainline publishers, they don't have any money for promotion. As Gwen, she and I doing her book, you have to promote it yourself. Now, if you like things like TikTok or what's called Book Talk, and you have a web page, you're going to be at it for a long time, promoting it after you've written it, after you've gone through all that stuff, whether you self-publish or have a regular publisher. So it's not just sitting down and knocking it out. Even as much effort as that takes, there's a lot of work involved in publishing a book. And everybody here that's published one knows how long it takes, how much back and forth you go, and if you're writing nonfiction, like most of what we would be talking about here, you really have to be accurate, and that takes a lot of time, going back and forth. I mean, I don't know, where's Andrea? Where'd she go? Okay. How many times did we go back and forth by email?
Until you got too tired of my emails.
No, it takes a lot. Don't underestimate the effort it takes just because mom likes it.
And I'll just say, as somebody with a PhD in history, after my PhD, my wife occasionally was struggling a little bit with insomnia, and she would just say, "Tell me about your dissertation again." Cured.
I've been a writer most of my life, and my brother, who's deceased now, published a really good book before he not long before he passed, and I always felt like I had something to say, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't know. I thought about writing something about my brother and my relationship with him. I thought about writing something about the New Jersey that we grew up in the 70s, and actually in the final book here, some of that is actually in here. But I couldn't come up to the idea, and I finally had. This is going to sound cliche, but I just had that moment of clarity on the top of, and it's in my book, that moment of clarity on the top of a mountain in New Jersey 4 years ago, when or I guess it's almost 5 years ago now, where it just clicked that this is the event in my life, my friendship with this young man, and him having his life stripped away from him at 17. It's like probably the most burning, unresolved, emotional event in my life. And I just thought, that's my book. And it's got to be my book. And it's got to be my book because I'm the only person alive who can still tell that story.
Okay, this is my last story, my last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience if you have any questions. So begin thinking about if you have any questions for these gentlemen. My last question for you is there something that you would really like to say about your book that we haven't talked about already this afternoon? Something that you think would be very important to mention about your book?
Well, not so much about the book, although there are mistakes in here that will be fixed in the next edition. It's very hard to write about the AT without, say, a Dave Field or Warren Doyle pointing out some error. A lot of these mistakes will be stuff that only a true AT nerd would ever notice. But it's still important. It's still important to get it right. So that's about the book. But on the subject generally, I just want to say that there's so much more to explore here. AT history, ATC history, and encourage everybody to go at it either on your own or. I mean, you've got Gwen's book. It's the only book about the pioneer women that most people here have never heard of on the trail. That's out there. All these other books here, they're all parts of that story. And at the museum, with the Hall of Fame, that's something we tend to try to rectify, getting more of these stories about unknown people. And, you know, as Larry often says, we should record the sessions of the selection committee, which are not always pass muster in a family newspaper, but a lot of these stories get told there and end up with the Hall of Fame, but a lot of them just stay within the committee. And I just encourage, support the museum, because that's where most of the exploration is going on these days.
I would say that one of the best lessons I learned in writing the book that's already out is I started working on the book 2018, 2019, something like that, and I wanted to write a book about the single largest rerouting of the Appalachian Trail and kind of the decision making that went into that. It was more an administrative story in many ways, and I started working on it as much because I was curious about it as anything else. I just wanted to understand it better. I mean, this is what we, one of the reasons we do research and one of the reasons we write is we want to try to answer questions that matter to us. And so, but then I did the thing which we should all do, which is if you're writing something that's place-based, I went to the place. I went to Floyd County, I went to Carroll County, I went to Patrick County, I went to Washington County, Virginia, and I just started talking to people. And mostly over the age of 70, I spent a lot of time on people's front porches and around their dining room tables. And I have a lot of photographs in the book as a result of that nobody's ever seen except their families because they had them in shoeboxes in the closet and that kind of thing. But the more I talked to them, the more I realized that my book wasn't about the rerouting of the trail, it was about them. And so that's the story that emerged from the research process and the writing process. And people that the best fiction writers will tell you that they have a plot outline in their head, but then they have to see what the characters are actually going to do. Mm-hmm. And the only way they do that is they start writing, and then the characters start doing things. I mean, you know from some of yours, right? And so you have to be willing to just let the story tell you what it is, and you can't be too rigid about it. As you should have an outline because otherwise you'll never finish. But you have to let the story tell you what it is.
Okay, well, like Mills, I love talking about my book, and I think Mills does too. And because there's fascinating stories in my book, but in what I would like to say about it in summary, and I hope there'll be a lot of questions afterwards because I really want to talk about the book and the other books. But to see this story, this very important story to me, to see it in print, to see it come to print at age 68, I call it my life's greatest personal achievement, and it will be my legacy. And that's how much importance and value I place in this 259-page volume that's in front of me. Thank you.
I do want to personally thank each one of you for sharing the information. And I'm going to encourage the audience now. Any questions about their book, about the story, about what's not in the story, about their process of writing? Go ahead.
I'd like to know, given your perspective about the history of the Appalachian Trail, if you'd speculate just for a few minutes about what it might be, what the experience might be 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now.
Well, we're living in this really weird time right now, and I can tell you what I hope it'll be. I don't, but like a lot of us who are going through this weird time, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen in a week from now, because there's an episode from the Three Stooges from the 1930s, and the Three Stooges are in the Navy, and the Three Stooges become mistakenly these submarine commanders. Okay, so the Three Stooges have this, are operating this submarine, and the submarine, as they show it on the picture, is just up and down, up out of the water, down, down, deep down, comes right back up, deep down. I mean, that's the way our news cycle is. It changes constantly. We have no idea what's going to happen in 24 hours or 48 hours or a week from now or a month from now or a year from now or in 2028, and then to go into the future, it's almost unanswerable. However, I'll just say, I pray and I hope that the communities that appreciate nature and the outdoors and protecting, may I use the E word, the environment, recognizing the C word, climate change, and trying to do something about it, that the human spirit of those movements, and of course the Appalachian Trail is part of that, will prevail and will somehow get through this moment and have something 10 years or 20 years later that we see as a evolution of what we have now, and somehow an even better, more protected trail.
Like Wells, I would say, it's impossible to guess because it's entirely dependent on whether in the next several years vast swaths of public lands are sold to private development. And, that's happened before in the history of the United States, and it will happen again, but at this particular moment, it's a particular threat to the Appalachian Trail. It's worse, the threats are worse in the west than they are in the east, but it's a real thing, and there's a real intent to sell those public lands, and this is especially true of the Forest Service lands. And so it could be that once again, AT hikers, as they did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, hike through across mountains that have been entirely logged off. And, Earl Shaffer, we were talking about before lunch, Earl talks about coming up to a ridge top and not knowing where to go because all the trees have been cut down, and with them went the trailblazers. And so I think that the odds of that being the AT hiking experience are better than 50-50 at the moment. And it's really hard not to have climate despair overwhelm you. But somebody asked me on a podcast recently, what was the biggest difference I noticed between hiking on the trail in the 1970s and hiking on the trail today? And I said, the trail is so much quieter now. And I didn't mean human quiet, because it can be louder because of human traffic, but there are so few birds on the Appalachian Trail now as compared to when I first started hiking 50 years ago. And so it's just a lot quieter in the mornings. The birds used to really wake you up, and not so much anymore. And I can't remember the last time I saw a bat on Blue Mountain, where I live, north of Front Royal. So, so that's a real issue. The ash trees are all falling all over Virginia and North Carolina, and so, the climate adapts, but it can't adapt as fast as we're unadapting it. So I think the AT hiking experience is going to be very different 20 years from now, and I guess it falls into the category of we'll see.
What a question. Difficult to answer now, and 3.5 years from now, maybe can answer it better. Well, a lot of things already have happened. I don't know that AT lands are under threat of being sold off, but that's not the issue. You've got a lot of things that have already happened. The AT Lands Office, which buys land for views and for habitat and stuff, they canceled the lease on that a few weeks ago, and they're looking for a place to live now. But then the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which funded up to $200 million worth of AT corridor, is under threat again, even though in 2019 it was supposed to be protected forever. just the other day, the Agriculture Department, which is ATC's partner for the Forest Service lands, announced it was withdrawing the roadless rule, which means you can open up those AT lands, either for loggers or recreation or what have you. That was a very important protection in the 1990s and early 2000s for the trail. That's going to be gone if it goes through the public comment process. So there were a lot of those sort of not the top headline stuff going on that's affecting the trail. And then there's good old Mother Nature. I don't think, a lot of attention after Hurricane Helene was to, can you get through on the trail? Most of that treadway has been opened up again, but what nobody outside of ATC and the trail clubs is talking about is what that did to the habitat. Hundreds and hundreds of trees got blown down. Hurricanes bring in a lot of pathogens when they're flying it and dump it on that habitat. All those nice little salamanders you saw hiking through Virginia, they're out in the Atlantic Ocean now. All those kinds of things, and repairing that is going to take a long time, and that changes the experience. He's talking about the birds. There's a great deal more that's been damaged, and it's going to take some kind of work to modify that and bring that experience back. That's an awful lot of work, done by the clubs, done by ATC volunteer crews, done by a lot of other people, and takes money to support it. ATC raised money to hire professional sawyers to clear that path, but when you get to the botanists and the people working on the trees, working on the bugs that are now invading the trees, that's a lot of other things that have to happen. And that marriage between trail people and the government is broken. Communication is not what it used to be, and the staff that ATC staff have worked with for years and years, half of them are gone. So we can always be optimistic, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of support.
As far as the process of book writing goes, have you either used or thought of using AI at all, and if so, how, in writing your book?
I'll go first because I did. I did not use it for writing. I sensed, as Brian said, presses don't have much in the way of editing support anymore. I took what I thought was the final draft of the book that's coming out in October, and I asked my friend Claude AI to look for two things. First, where am I repeating myself? Because I'd read it too many times, and so you start to miss that. And it found one place in the entire manuscript where I'd already said that somewhere else, and I missed that. And then the second was I asked him, where do you think, Claude, where do you think my audience, and I described what my intended audience was, where do you think the audience's attention would begin to lag? And it pointed to two places in the manuscript where it thought that was true, and I agreed with one of those. So it was like hiring, I could have hired a graduate student and done the same thing, but Claude gave me that answer in under 30 seconds. So, they're fast. And so it was useful in that sense. But so as in kind of a last edit or pass over the manuscript.
No, and maybe next time.
In my life right now, I've got enough rabbit holes, so I don't need AI.
And I'll say one other thing. I mentioned I have two more books in process. The next one is about a guy named Eiler Larson, who was the first person to hike from Maine to Georgia. He did it over 6 years, so he was a section hiker. He did it in the 30s, long before the trail was even finished. And fascinating guy and a complete kook. But he was Danish. He was a Danish immigrant. And so the few letters that he wrote back to his family in Denmark are in Danish, and Mills Kelly is not learning Danish. And so it turns out that AIs are very good at translating. And because I took the translations I got of those Danish letters and postcards and gave them to a friend who is Danish, and she found 2 words that she disagreed with the translation on. So for that kind of thing, it's useful. It didn't tell me, all it did was spit out a translation though.
Our authors will be available here for the rest of the afternoon. Feel free to come up to their table, talk about their book, talk about your own book that you're future going to perhaps write. And let's give them one more round of applause.
For our last presentation, we have Warren Doyle, who's the last I knew anyway. I can't guarantee this is accurate. Had hiked the AT 18 times, and that's just complete through hikes. That doesn't count messing around and shorter hikes and day hikes and stuff. So his first through hike in 1973, and among other things, Warren did do a thesis on the sociology of group through hike on the Appalachian Trail, and probably is the #1 educator for AT through hikers through his Appalachian Trail Institute. He taught many of the best through hikers their craft. So with that, Warren, let's turn it over to you.
Testing. All join hands and circle to the left. All the way back on the right-hand track. Now that I have your attention, and I realize this is not a contra dance, but a storytelling session, I'm listed as a storyteller. Well, I'm not really a storyteller, because I don't have a certificate from the Storytelling Institute, nor am I involved in the storytelling industry. I live near Jonesboro, Tennessee, the home of the International Storytelling Festival, but only for certified storytellers. So I sometimes cringe when people say I can't sing, I can't dance, I don't have a story to tell, because the folk tradition of communication has been co-opted commercially. And you start getting certifications for something that's should be natural and within us all. So first of all, I just want to thank the AT Museum and the Earl Shaffer Foundation for co-sponsoring this first festival. You've done a great job doing this. The panels have been great. The speakers have been great. The authors have been great. I've really enjoyed it, and I wish you nothing but the best in the future to continue this on. And I'm so glad that the AT Museum is here, because we talk a lot about natural resources. We've got a lot of people. Protect our natural resources. There's a lot of organizations out there protecting our natural resources. However, there is a species on this earth that walks this planet. They're called human beings. And I'm glad that there is an institution now here that is very caring of the importance of the human resource. So thank you so much, Larry, and all the volunteers, the Dawsons that are here for putting this on. I had the honor of doing a talk at the Hall of Fame introduction a few years ago when I talked about epiphanies in that beautiful room. I know Jim Foster has had put a lot of effort into that beautiful room there. You videotaped it, didn't you? I think somebody did. Well, it's a videotape, and I'm just so glad it's part of the archives. I'm not going to duplicate that because those were epiphanies. I'm going to sort of, there might be one that overlaps. Of course, many of you weren't there at that talk. So I'm just going to tell stories, and the outline, if you want to call it, is First one's going to be the intro to the trail. Second one is going to be called Bear Mountain Zoo and a conversation with Walt, Walt being Walt Whitman. Bear Mountain Buffet and Disco. Wow, a disco in a trail story. You know, you probably know about buffets being part of trail stories, but a disco, that's interesting. Another story will be called And We Both Came a Long Way for What We Wanted. And we both came a long way for what we wanted. And then the last one will be called Pink Legs and Camouflage. There's a juxtaposition there, pink legs and camouflage. These stories are all true. They may be embellished somewhat, but only from the actual facts. And I have some props to further whet your curiosity, I hope. I have this, of course, you all know that's a headlight, that's nothing. That's nothing. And I have this, for some of you, this is called a ski pole. Most of you know that. Now this thing, what the heck is this thing? What is this thing? A Sierra cup, yeah. Sierra cup. And then I got this. Oh my God, something's in here. Yeah, and what's this? A milk crate. Don't ask me where I got it. All right. So, Larry, you had a nice introduction, but I only have 9 through hikes and 9 section hikes, okay? So, I got in a routine when I never gave up a job or lost a job over my hiking. I'm first generation college from a working class background. I'm not a trust fund baby or collecting disability checks at the age of 21. And helped raise 2 children and helped put them through college and stuff, and now they're all independent adults. But I got into this routine of doing a through hike every 5 years. Now, I had 9 through hikes, only one alone, my first one, because I had to do it alone. And after that, since I was an educator, to share that experience, I organized, as a labor of love, a group, and we would pretty much day hike almost the entire Appalachian Trail during summer vacation. And in 1975, I had a group of 19 students. And the beauty of that was everyone who started finished. And it was a beautiful, powerful experience of all the values that I believed in that could not be taught within the confines of a societal institution. In between those 5 years, I was an educator, so I had, maybe 7 weeks, 8 weeks off, maybe in the summer. And I worked it where I would have 2 weeks to myself. The other 6 weeks would be for family vacations and so forth. And in that 2 weeks, I would do it when I wasn't busy with my regular job. And so I would go out for basically 9 days, take a week off, weekend on either side. And in that 9 days, I would do a substantial section. Now, back then, I loved to walk. I loved to walk. I didn't necessarily love to walk fast, but I loved to walk long. Get up an hour before dawn and hear the birds. I still hear the birds, so maybe we're hiking in different places. To see the forest fill up with light angling in from the east, and to keep on walking and to sense the smells and the rotation, the cyclical nature of each day. And at the end of the day, to see the reverse order, to be in these woods and with the sunset angling in from my left, because I was hiking north as the sun set to the west. And a reverse order of the bird song, and try to figure out, do the birds sound different at dawn than they do at dusk? And so I like to hike along. So basically, you know, if you say walk 2 miles an hour, if you decide to walk 17 hours a day, that's 34 miles. Same speed, different level of comfort. That's all it is. So I would do maybe 270 miles of trail during that 9 days. If you do your math, it doesn't take very long to accumulate another section hike by doing that. So I was able to do 2 hikes basically every 5 years. And it was on these section hikes that the stories finally came to me. And the only reason why they came to me was I was mature enough to receive them. I had long ago forgot about miles. I had long ago gave up my fears of walking alone at night, camping alone at night, lying on the forest floor without, if it was nice weather. I had given up all those fears that our culture had instilled in me about how dangerous, how the devil and the Satan and the witches resided in the forest. The Brothers Grimm had a lot to do with that, right? Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood. The danger was always in the wilderness. And it certainly served its purpose because it gave people a reason to chop down all the forest, because then the devil didn't have any place to hide. So they worked hand in hand with this industrial development. So these weeks, I had a very, very busy job at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. I operated an outdoor education center for them in a 470-acre park. That's where my children grew up, in a nice farmhouse, away, as far away from the belly as the beast as possible. And those 9 days were precious. And they were so different than my regular life, 50 weeks of the year. So I think the preciousness, my maturity gave way to these stories. I want to introduce the first one where this is before email. I'm writing a bunch of memos to make sure everything is going to go okay during my absence and all that. I'm running late. I wanted to drive up to Connecticut to start my hike, and I wanted to leave at noon, and here I am at 5 o'clock still writing out memos. And I jumped into my car, and I hadn't even bought food yet, and went into the supermarket and bought the first thing that was on sale. You know, they have these orange things, oh, that must be on sale, you know, orange labels. And there was muffins, English muffins, and they came 6 to a pack. I made sure they were sliced muffins because I didn't want to waste the energy of cutting them during my hike. And I had heard somewhere, I don't know, sometime someone said people can't live by bread alone. So I said I should get something other than these muffins. So I turned around another corner, and there, before my eyes, was another orange label and Snicker bars. And 6 Snicker bars to a pack. Oh, wow, same as the muffins. So I did some quick math, and I said, okay, I'm going to be out for 9 days. 4 packs of muffins, that's 24. 4 packs of Snicker bars, that's 24. Divided by 9, that's almost 3 meals a day. So I was all set. And I started driving, and it's during rush hour around DC. Oh my God. And I became very aware of all these signs. Go left, slow down, speed up, merge right, express lane, almost express lane, this toll, aggressive driver imagery. What the heck is that? Aggressive driver imagery. And concrete barriers and being close to like big semi-tractor trailer trucks, inches from my little old car, inches, 60 miles an hour. And I said, well, this is like my real life. Well, I gotta obey the signs, because if I don't obey the signs, I'm gonna get hurt. Or if I have people in my car, my loved ones are gonna get hurt. And that's what my real life is. I gotta do my job. Because if I don't do my job, if I don't do what they tell me to do, someone's gonna be hurt. And it really, I was thinking that, but it really struck home, and I'm gonna end all my stories on this, that, you know, my real life was just maneuvering. That's all it was. And so, I don't know, about 10 hours later, driving through the night, I shut off my car. By the way, I learned this today has been really nice, and driving up, I had my first benefit of coming up here. I discovered that my car, which I've had for 6 months, actually has air conditioning. It's the first car that I've had that has air conditioning at the age of 75. I'm pretty proud of that fact. But anyways, so I shut off my car, right? And so there's no more smell of diesel and exhaust fumes. There's no more signs. And the minute I shut that car off, no sound of a motor vehicle. I open up that door and I smell the moisture of the mist shining in the sunrise coming up off of the Housatonic River as it spills through this glacially gouged granite rocks with potholes and stuff tumbling down. And the air was fresh. The pine trees were just, the hemlocks, you could smell the hemlocks, and they were waving in the mist, in the sunlight. And I immediately felt relaxed. I was entering into another world. I opened up the trunk of my car, put on my backpack, and I hadn't backpacked in a bit. And I put those shoulder straps on, and it felt like a reverse slow dance with someone you really love when they put their arms around you. And you know, to buckle the waist belt, it's like a hug in your arms. And I got my $1 ski pole, and I started walking. And it felt so good. Why does it feel so good? Those first few steps that we take. And I was just in the sense of delight. And everything, my first slip in the mud, my first trip over a route, my first dipping my Sierra cup into that wonderful water and sipping it. And I wasn't going, woo, Giardia, it tickles me, ooh, Giardia. Because Giardia wasn't even part of the vocabulary then. And even, I'm going to wax poetic here in a very weird way. I might get in trouble for this. I told Larry I was going to behave myself. I took even great pleasure from taking my first dump while sitting on a mossy stump. I don't know whether that's haiku or whatever, there's something like that, but it does rhyme. So, and I just was free. No more maneuvering. I was flowing. So 3 days later, now this was the end of October, and all the leaves had just fallen. So they were crisp. They weren't wet yet from the rain or the snow, but they were crisp. And I made a lot of noise when I was walking through those leaves. And I had to do a lot of night hiking because the days were short then. And what was nice about it is everything I was sharing that forest with, I could hear. Everything. So, you hear, and it makes your heart beat faster. And you'd look with my headlight and I'd shine it, and there'd be pairs of eyes looking at me. And maybe one of them would say, Bambi, the moon seems pretty low tonight. And then you don't see the eyes anymore. You hear that rustling, and you shine your light, and they look at you again. But it was wild, it made your heart beat faster. But the beat of my heart was not instilled by fear. It was instilled by a sense of gratitude that I was out there. And I didn't want my heart to be still. And so I had 2 nights of this. I come down to the Hudson River. For some reason, there wasn't much traffic. It was right near sunset. I'm walking across that beautiful, beautiful bridge, high over, I guess, the only tidal river on the whole Appalachian Trail. And the water was still, placid, way down below. And it was reflecting the sky. And the sky was all sorts of colors. You've seen it when it's all purples and greens and blues and oranges and constantly changing at sunset. And it was reflected below me. So I was going like through this kaleidoscope of colors. Boy, just beautiful. And so I finally came to the zoo. And of course, as you know, the trail goes to the zoo. It's one of the oldest sections, if not the oldest section of the Appalachian Trail. And they lock it. And the reason why they lock it, they don't want people messing with the animals. So I wasn't going to mess with the animals. So, I said, well, how am I going to get over this robber baron fence? Big steel iron. It's different fence now. Big steel, corrugated steel with points. I mean, there's an alternative blue trail across it which you can take, but make no apologies. I follow the sacred white blazes that have been put up by countless and countless numbers of volunteers who are on the top of my AT list. The top of the AT list in terms of human resources are the volunteer trail maintainers. So I said, I'm going to go over this fence. So I looked, and there's hedges on the other side of this brick wall. And so I take my pack, and I throw it over onto the bushes so nothing would break. Everything worked out. Getting my pole over, that was easy. And I started climbing up this gate, shoving my feet in between these 2 things, climbing. I could never do it now, but climbing. And then I get up to the top where the points were, sticking up. And I got my hands on the points, and I'm reaching my leg over, and I get this sudden image of genital shish kebab, and that got me over real quick. And so I'm on the other side. I get my pack, and I start walking to the zoo. And it was this time of day when objects were dark. And the air around these objects were an ever-deepening gray. So I could see these objects. And I finally came to the cages that had pretty much the same type of animals that I had been walking through in the wild. The ones that were rustling through the leaves. Wild. And the raccoons and the possums and the foxes. And as I walked by them, not one of those animals moved. And then I started thinking about cages. What have those cages done to these animals? I am an animal. Should I allow a cage to be put over me? Do I have a cage over me? And if I do have a cage over me, how can I push it off? And if I don't have a cage over me, how can I resist putting that cage over me? Because I want to be wild. I want to determine my safety. I want to determine my freedom. So boy, my head was bursting. And I said, hey, wait a minute. There's a guy down here. I'm going to talk to him because he knows about this. You know, this guy that said, I sing the body electric. I yell a barbaric yop across the world. And there's a statue of Walt Whitman. How ironic. In a locked zoo. It's a statue of him on a granite rock with his arm outstretched. And it used to be, last time it wasn't there anymore, but it used to be they had the opening stanzas of the Song of the Open Road. So I'm talking to Walt about cages and this and that. And I'm talking to him in the middle of the night, right? And I said, well, if you were going to answer me, Walt, the answer would probably be at your feet. And so I'm going to paraphrase the opening phrases of Song of the Open Road. It's the finest literary moment on the whole Appalachian Trail. Yet the last time I was there, people were walking by it like this. That's too bad. This is the way it goes. Afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open trail. I'm healthy. I'm free. The world is before me, the long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. Henceforth I ask not good fortune. I myself am good fortune. I'm done with libraries and querulous criticisms and indoor complaints. Strong and content, I travel the open trail. Camarado, I give you my hand. For my love is more important than money. So that was Bear Mountain Zoo and a conversation with Walt. Next, it happened just immediately. 2 stories in one night. Holy cow. I climbed over another robber baron fence and I got into the swimming pool area. Then I had to climb over another fence. And then I had to go through this tunnel underneath Route 9. And I saw colors I hadn't seen yet. All I was seeing was brown and gray of dead leaves and skeleton trees. But now I was confronted with oranges and bright yellows and purples and all sorts of shapes and the faint smell of urine. Because that's where, they take a pee, the kids, they gotta go, right? It's a people's park in the summer. So that was interesting. So then I'm going around the robber baron's place, right? And I was gonna go up to the top of Bear Mountain. Now people say, you can't camp on top of Bear Mountain. Well, yeah, you can't. But I always have to ask, why do they have these rules? So I remember asking before this, why do you can't camp on top of Bear Mountain? Well, they say, well, you know, there's a road that goes up there and people used to party, and we got tired of cleaning up all their mess for the families to come up the next day. That makes sense, a lot of work. So then they put a gate on that, I guess Perkins Memorial Drive, and they still walked up there and they still partied. You know, spray paint satanic messages on the, you know, stars on the rocks and swastikas, and smash their whiskey bottles, leave their needles on the ground, throw away their used condoms and all that kind of stuff. Well, I could see why they have that rule. But then I had to think, you know, my parents, they spent a lot of time raising me right, you know? And I don't do those things. So those rules don't apply to me. So my intent was to go up to the top of Bear Mountain. That was my intent. And all of a sudden, a door opens in this robber baron place, and a light from within shines on a poster that was inside the door. And it had the 4 words that would make any serious hiker stop in their tracks and change their plans. What were those 4 words? Anybody? 4 words.
Free food over here.
All you can eat. Yeah. It was a buffet. I said, holy cow. And, you know, I was eating these Snicker muffins, you know, like opening up these muffins and putting a Snicker bar in between, eating them. They got pretty lame after 3 days, so I said, I'm hitting this buffet. And so it was such a fancy place, I had to check my backpack in the coat check room. And then they said it's upstairs. They don't have it there anymore, but that's what it was back then. And I could see the hostess way up, and she was all decked out, you know, really nice skirt and stuff like that. I'm walking up the stairs, and I'm looking at me and go, oh boy, look at that mud on my calves. And, you know, so when I got up there, I was about ready to say, just put me in a corner. But she put me in a corner anyways. And the place was so big. There were 2 wedding pre-dinner receptions going on, 2 separate ones. And in the middle was big ice sculpture with water coming out with this buffet. And I said, whoa. And I bet I was the only person there with mud on their calves. I wasn't going to go around and check at everybody, but I thought I might be. And so, you know, I went into, we used to call them gorgies. Some people say pig outs, but back then the word was gorgie. And I'm eating and eating and eating and eating. You know, I knew I was going to spend about an hour there. So when I was eating, I would observe and try to figure out who the bride's parents were on this side and the groom's parents were on this side, who were the bride's parents and friends on this side, who were the groom's. You know, I had like 4 comparison groups. So it was really good. And I also thought about cages. So after I was sufficiently satiated, I waddled down the steps. Now the worst thing about an all-you-could-eat is when it isn't at the end of your day, because now you got to walk with a full stomach. Whew, that's rough. So I get my backpack and I started walking. I go around this building and another door opens up. And this door, there was like sort of like smoke and flashing lights coming out of it. And it was a disco. They were having a disco. So I didn't want to climb up that mountain with a full belly, so I'm going to go to disco. So I walk in, you know, past the bouncer. They go, who the heck is this guy? And I sit down. I have my headlight on. Maybe I should put it on, right? Yeah. And so I sit down, and there I saw human behavior that was maybe a precursor to what I had seen upstairs with the marriage, pre-wedding thing. Maybe it was a precursor. But this was really more, I could see what was happening. So instead of the white and the button-down shirts and the nice dresses and the suits, in here it was all leather and spandex and skin, okay? And this was interesting animal behavior because maybe the most basic of all, there were the predators and there were the prey. And to see them doing that dance was fascinating. And now I wasn't going to ask anyone to dance out of the fear of rejection. So I just sat and watched this whole thing unfold. But then they played Whitney Houston. She was new at the time. One of her first hits was, how will I know? How will I know? How will I know? Dun, 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 dun. And boy, I just had to get up. And I got up and I started dancing, and they put the strobe lights on, and it's like being in the movie show. That's great. Then they shut the strobe lights off, and I said, and I took my headlight off and I started flipping it on and off over me to have that effect. And after the dance was over, I noticed that both the predators and the prey were looking at me in a way that said to me I should maybe leave the premises. So I left the premise, and I go by this big old bouncer, stereotypic bouncer. And he said, "Hey, bud, where you going?" I said, I knew he didn't know anything about rules and regulations. So I'm going to camp on top of Bear Mountain. "Oh, there's bears up there. You got a gun?" I said, "No, I don't have a gun." "You sure you don't have a gun?" "No, I don't need a gun." "You need a gun." I said, "Thanks, but I don't have a gun." And I'm walking away from this door. And one of the last things I hear from this guy, "I warned you." So I'm past the flashing lights, can't hear Whitney Houston anymore, and I'm all alone. And before they put that multi-million-dollar trail up Bear Mountain, it was just a regular old trail built by volunteers, but it had become eroded. And so in the deep parts, the leaves were really deep, like they were up to my knees. And so pretty soon, though, the disco beat was replaced by, the percussion was my legs going to the leaves. And the beat was my heart. And the light, the flashing light, was now replaced by moonlight, intersecting with the mist all around me. And when I got up to the top of Bear Mountain, I could look down, and the Hudson River was like a black ribbon in between all these lights, winding, a black ribbon between all these lights. And I could look upstream and see the graceful lights of the Bear Mountain Bridge. And I could see a darkened spot where Walt Whitman was still standing there about the song of the open road. And I could still see the lights of the robber baron place. I'm sure the wedding reception was over, but the disco was still going on. And as I slipped into my sleeping bag, what I felt was I was so blessed to be able to slip in and out of both worlds so easily without becoming trapped in either of them. I don't want to be, quotes, a hiker bum, but I also don't want to be a corporate prisoner. So how can we balance romance with reality, and how can we balance idealism with practicality? How can we achieve what Robert Frost said in the Two Tramps in Mud Time? He said at the end, the noblest goal of people should be to make one's vocation as two eyes see as one. Oh, I love poets. My mentor was a poet. Two eyes, you know, the only time we know we have different vision is when we cover one of our eyes. But other than that, it's seamless. So that's right after that Bear Mountain Zoo and a conversation with Walt. The next story, let me see here. I'm conscious of the time. And that was Bear Mountain Buffet and Disco. Okay, the next one happens on another hike. I think I had the same Snicker muffin dealie. Got out late, this time driving south. I'm gonna hike south to Springer Mountain. And I think I was starting in Hot Springs. And so on this particular day, I was only on the trail for one day and I was already tired with my food. And so I was gonna hike from the Big Pigeon River up to Newfound Gap in the hopes that I could get up there before it got dark, in the hopes I could find somebody to take me into Gaggenberg to an all-you-could-eat. So that was my goal. Hike, 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 hike. You know, it was beautiful. Just hike, hike. Look, wow, look at the view. Hike, 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 hike. And I get down there, and there's a woman there that was in ALDHA, the Long Distance Hikers Association, and she's going into Gaggenberg, and so she brought me in and said, you know, where do you want to stop? I'll say, I'll give you one choice for an answer. He said, all you could eat. You got it. And so she drops me off at this Ogle's Family Buffet. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. And I open up the doors like a ranch hand at the end of a long drive, you know, cattle drive, going into a tavern, in great anticipation of this buffet, of stuffing myself for about an hour. And there, in front of me, was something I had never seen before. That's why I like walking the trail. You see things you never see before. And it was a buffet. But I didn't have to walk around it like I had to do at that wedding in Bear Mountain Buffet. I mean, that took effort to walk around. Here, I could just stand right where I was, and there was a conveyor belt that was bringing the food out from the kitchen right in front of you. And it was going, you know, at a speed where you could scoop things in your plate. I said, whoa. So, you know, I didn't practice delayed gratification here at all. I just went for the first food that was in front of me. Hey, this is shiny, it looks good, boom. And so here I have a full plate, and I look, and here comes all the meat. And I said, oh, I got is beans and corn and green beans and all these veggies. And I wasn't gonna flip them out into the passing desserts to get at the meat. I just said, technology has mastered me. But I was gonna come back a second time and master technology. And so I ate my veggies first. Oh boy. And and then the next time I just filled up my platter with meat. So I was, you know, eating, and this time I said I should bring in some reading material. So what was appropriate for Gaggenberg is right before I went in, there was a little convenience store, and I bought the National Enquirer. I had never read it for a long time, and I thought it was very appropriate for being in Gaggenberg. And I'm reading this story about a strange love triangle between Elizabeth Taylor and Michael Jackson and a chimpanzee. You know, that was interesting. So, anyways, I'm full again. I have about an hour and a half of daylight. I said to myself, it's been a great day, what should I do now? And I thought, this was early April. The night before, I listened to the Final Four on my transistor radio. That's back when they had the radios up here, right? And I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to hitch out of town. I'm gonna start hiking from Newfound Gap, and right when I'm around Mount Love or so, I'm gonna turn on that station and listen to the final NCAA basketball championship. And the second half, I would be able to listen to it at the highest point of the Appalachian Trail on, I gotta be politically correct, maybe, Kauai. formerly known as Clingman's Dome. And so I waddle up to that, where the park ends and the town starts. I'm hitching. I said, I don't think anybody's going to pick me up. But one thing I noticed, when my beard turned white, people picked me up more instead of my beard being brown. There's something about an old guy, he's harmless, right? So this little pickup truck picks me up, a Ranger pickup truck. And it had all pinstripes on it, colorful pinstripes, and it looked really young. And in the front seat were two young people. And so I said, I'll ride in the back, with my pack. And they said, oh, no, you ride in front of us. I said, I'm pretty ripe. I haven't taken a shower in a while. He said, oh, no, you sit in front with us. So I put my pack in the back. And I sat in the front, and, three of us in the front seat of Ford Ranger. And we're driving, and it was a delightful couple, young couple. And they lived on the other side of the mountain, Hayesville, North Carolina. And she was a nursery assistant, and he was a carpenter's assistant. They were high school sweethearts. They were out of school. They were going to work for a year, and they were going to get married. And I said, wow, you working tomorrow? I said, yeah. I said, well, what are you doing way over here? They said, well, we're here because of our T-shirts. And back then, the airbrush thing of T-shirts, all these bright colors, how they made these T-shirts. They were selling them in Gettysburg, and and I kid you not, this is true. I'm not making this up. Hers said, Diane loves Jack. And his said, Jack loves Diane. Yeah, if you know that folks, Cougar used to, John Mellencamp, two American kids from America's heartland. Oh boy. So it was so sweet. And for some reason, I decided to look at my T-shirt. Now, I had been wearing a poncho a lot the whole time, because it sort of like it had been raining. And I had started out with a white T-shirt. And so I look at my T-shirt like for the first time, and it had patterns, but it wasn't like pink or orange or red or sparkly stuff. But it was patterns of green and gray, bluish mold. Just patterns of mold. And I sort of said, well, I got a T-shirt too, but you know what? We both came a long way for what we wanted. I mean, how often could I have a multi T-shirt like that in real life? So they dropped me off. I started walking to that beautiful spruce forest, beautiful trail, heading towards Kauai. And about 9 o'clock, it was time for the game. So I turn it, I stop, I turn it, couldn't get it, couldn't get the station. Tried and tried and tried and tried. And I was bummed out. My perfect evening, spoiled. Oh well. So I just put my poncho on the ground, my pad on the ground, and just laid on my pad, go to sleep. I don't know what it was, but for the first time ever, I dissolved completely into the air. And if a bear came down the trail, it would have went right through me. That's how I felt, just part of the night air, and all this whatever I was at the time, I was looking up at the stars above me, and the moonlit lace tops, the moon was somewhere, and it was illuminating the lace tops, like lace tops of the evening pines. It was just beautiful, stunning. And then all of a sudden, this thing that I was suddenly felt something right here in my neck. And I finally molecularized again and became a person. And it was my headphone that I had just put around my neck. So one last try. I put my headphone on, lying there. not getting it, about ready to turn it off, and then this beautiful soprano voice singing an aria filled my ears. And I had turned on to NPR out of Knoxville, and they were having an opera. So there I am, pretty full stomach, interesting t-shirt, looking at the stars and the evening pines in the moonlight. And then what do you think it was?
Carpenter bee?
Oh, that's good. That's a good answer. Nope. But they make that sound. What do you think it was? The station had gone off the air, and it was static. And I smiled. I took my headphones off, and the last thought I had was, and we both came a long way for what we wanted. As I mentioned up here at the Hall of Fame thing, you have to be out there to have these gifts. So I have one more story, but before I do that, the AT maintainers and the AT keepers of the human history of the trail, thank you for protecting, creating, and protecting a space where people can be out there. The last story, pink legs and camouflage. It wasn't this particular hike, but it was another hike that I was hiking south to Springer. I always like to do one of my section hikes at the height of the northbound season. You know, they call it the bubble. Because, you know, one day I might, because I was doing like 30, 35 miles southbound, I might run into one day I ran into 132 northbounders. That was like about 3 days worth. And the next day I ran into 129, you know, so, and I would, you know, ask them questions and make some observations for predictive validity and stuff like that. And so I was on one of these hikes that this happened. I wasn't good about protecting my skin. You know, I have fair skin. I don't really like the sun, and all it takes is one day, because the leaves aren't out yet that early up high. And so I had gotten a pretty good sunburn on my legs and my arms. You know, after that I started wearing a long sleeve shirt, but I didn't want to put on long pants. And it was like pink. It was like, I imagined myself like a little baby, little pink baby legs. And on this particular day, I was going down by High Tower Gap. I think it's Sassafras Mountain, one of those. But it was going down into High Tower Gap. And this was a day where I decided that my favorite animal to be on the trail going downhill is a deer. Oh, I love how deers move. You got these little legs, big bodies. They're so graceful. They don't run. You know, human beings run. That's why they have knee problems. I don't know whether deer have knee problems or not, but they never put a lot of weight on one foot. And they're always off it pretty quick. And you know what? They don't carry canteens either. That was the last myth I wanted to turn into fact. Coming to the realization after about 32,000 miles that deer don't carry canteens, I decided not to carry water. And for my last thru hikes, I didn't carry water for the first about 700 miles until the Kimberling Creek to Dismal Creek thing. Now that's unheard of, right? Especially unheard of today. Because of So, by the way, part of my teaching style is being an agitator. I should have warned you that I was going to be pushing you out of your comfort zone. But you know what else pushes you out of your comfort zone? The trail. So why can't human beings do it as well? So I was going to be a deer, and I was loping down the mountains. I can't lope as much as anymore, but I was loping down the mountains. And so I'm coming down Sassafras Mountain, and I'm loping like a deer. And I come around a corner, and I see movement. And on one side of the trail was 2 soldiers. And on this side of the trail was 3 soldiers. And they're all down on their knee with their rifles like this. And their bodies were strewn with bullets. And they had black underneath their eyes. And their bodies were heavily burdened. And that's what they were taught to do when somebody had invaded their perimeter. Well, that made the deer in me leap even more. And I'm leaping and I'm leaping. I get around the next switchback. And there's the rest of the platoon. 6 people on this side, maybe 5 people on this other. All like this, on either side of the trail, kneeling down. And I was just leapt through them all. And I saw my pink legs going past their heavily burdened bodies and their guns and their bullets. Woo! And I kept on going, where they couldn't see me anymore. I got all the way down to the bottom of that high tower gap. What happened? What do I think? What do they think? You know, I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But this is what I have figured out. They were maneuvering. And I was flowing. And that's why this heart and mind and body is always going to remain close to this sacred, white-blazed footpath. Thank you, and we'll have time for questions after this. By the way, I do have a book. It's 1 page, both sides, and it's free, so you don't have to worry about Venmo. And I'm sorry, I had a little trouble with my publisher. They closed down before I asked for more copies. It's the Johnson County, Tennessee Public Library. 10 cents a book, but they're free. So if you want a copy of my 1-page book, 37th edition, woo, that's been around a long time. You're welcome to that as well.
The Appalachian Trail and the community that surrounds it.
Good morning.
A special thanks to Larry Luxenberg, the AT Museum Founder, and the museum volunteers, and the folks at the Earl Shaffer Foundation for today's event. What a perfect way to meet some of the folks of the Appalachian Trail community, learn some history of the trail, and hear first-hand stories from the folks who walk the trail. We look forward to next year's Appalachian Trail Arts and Culture Festival.